Ambassador Kethavar walked through the empty halls of the human embassy for the third time that week. His forearms hung loose at his sides as he stared at the bare walls where colorful earth paintings once decorated the corridors. The silence felt wrong. For 200 years, this place had buzzed with activity. Human voices had filled these rooms with their strange laughter and heated debates. Now there was nothing. 3 months had passed since the humans left. 3 months since every human in the galaxy simply vanished without warning.
Kethavar stopped at the main office where Ambassador Chen used to work.
The desk was clean. The computers were wiped. Only a single piece of paper remained, placed carefully in the center of the empty desk. We thank the Galactic Council for the opportunity to participate in galactic civilization. Humanity formally withdraws from all treaties, agreements, and associations effective immediately. We wish all species prosperity in their future endeavors. That was it. No explanation. No demands. No threats. Just a polite goodbye from an entire species. Kethavar had read the message 100 times, but it still made no sense. Humans didn't do anything quietly. They argued about everything. They questioned every rule. They made noise wherever they went. Ambassador Chen had spent years fighting for human rights in council meetings, often shouting at other delegates when discussions got heated. The idea that humans would just leave without a fight seemed impossible. Yet here he was, standing in an empty embassy that felt like a tomb. The council had reacted exactly as expected when the news broke. Chancellor Vexthul of the Corvin Empire had actually smiled during the emergency session. His razor-sharp teeth gleamed as he declared it, a blessing from the void itself. Finally, he had said, his voice booming through the council chambers. We can govern without those chaotic primitives questioning our every decision. The other delegates had agreed. The Ashanti bureaucrats nodded their bulbous heads in approval. The elegant Saleth representatives fluttered their wings with what looked like relief. Even the ancient ethereal sage Morthon had remained silent, though his glowing form had flickered strangely during the discussion. Only Kethavar felt uneasy. Something about this didn't feel right. The Zenthari were natural investigators. Their species had evolved to notice patterns that others missed. While his colleagues celebrated humanity's departure, Kethavar kept asking questions. Why now? Why so suddenly? And most importantly, how had they managed to evacuate every human from every world in the galaxy without anyone noticing? The logistics alone should have been impossible. Humans lived on thousands of worlds. They worked on countless space stations. They operated shipping companies, research facilities, and small businesses throughout council space. Moving that many people should have taken years and involved massive cargo fleets. Someone should have seen something. But the reports coming in from across the galaxy told the same story everywhere. Human populations had simply vanished overnight. Their homes were empty but undisturbed. Their belongings remained behind. Their vehicles sat unused in driveways. It was as if every human had simply stepped outside one evening and never returned. Kethavar had spent weeks reviewing security footage from dozens of worlds. The recordings showed humans going about their normal daily routines right up until the day they disappeared. There were no signs of preparation for departure, no loading of ships, no packing of belongings. They were there one day and gone the next. The more he investigated, the stranger it became. On Corvin Prime, the human district had housed nearly 50,000 people. Security cameras showed empty streets the morning after humanity's announcement, but no ships had left the planet that night. The orbital stations reported no unusual traffic. The humans had simply vanished. It wasn't just the residential areas either. Human workers had disappeared from their jobs without notice. The Ashanti central bureaucracy discovered that 12% of their staff had been human, all working in what seemed like minor clerical positions. The Corvin military found empty offices where human consultants had worked on supply logistics. Even the council station itself had employed hundreds of humans in various support roles, all of whom had vanished without trace. What disturbed Kethavar most was how little anyone seemed to know about what the humans had actually been doing. When he asked Chancellor Vexthul about the human military consultants, the Corvin leader waved dismissively. Minor advisors, Vexthul had said. They handled some paperwork for our supply chains. Nothing important. But when Kethavar looked deeper, he found that these minor advisors had been involved in coordinating supply routes for 60% of the Corvin military. How had that gone unnoticed? The same pattern appeared everywhere he looked. Humans had held positions that seemed small and unimportant, But when he traced their actual responsibilities, they had been involved in far more than anyone realized. The Sci-Fi art community discovered that their recent cultural renaissance had depended heavily on materials synthesized by human companies. The Luminar energy beings found that humans had been maintaining critical systems across dozens of their worlds. Most disturbing of all, HFY learned that the Council's own data management systems had been designed and maintained by a human company. He had never heard of them before, despite working in the Council building for 20 years. As he stood in the empty embassy, HFY tried to imagine Ambassador Chen's face when she made the decision to leave. Had she known this day would come? Had all the humans known? He thought about their last conversation, just a week before the exodus. Chen had seemed tired, more so than usual. She had mentioned something about her people being disappointed but not surprised by the Council's latest trade restrictions on human businesses. At the time, HFY had assumed she was just frustrated with the usual political games. Now he wondered if there had been more to her words. A soft chime from his communicator interrupted his thoughts. It was a message from the Outer Rim territories. Another human colony had gone dark. That made 47 confirmed empty human settlements in the past month. HFY looked around the empty embassy one more time. The humans had built this place to last. The walls were solid, the systems were efficient, and everything was designed with the careful attention to detail that humans seemed to apply to everything they touched. But now it was just an empty shell, like everything else they had left behind. As he walked toward the exit, HFY noticed something he had missed before. There were small marks on the walls where pictures had hung. Neat rectangles of slightly different colored paint that showed where human artwork had once brightened these halls. Even in leaving, the humans had been thorough. They had taken everything that mattered and left everything clean and organized. HFY sealed the embassy doors behind him and walked back toward the council chambers. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, humanity was out there. But for the first time in 200 years, the galaxy would have to figure out how to move forward without them. He just hoped they could. 6 months after humanity's departure, General Zektar stared at the red warning lights flashing across his command center's main display. Every light represented a supply shortage somewhere in the Corvan Empire's vast military machine. Food rations running low on the frontier worlds, ammunition factories missing critical materials. Transport ships stranded without fuel. How is this possible? He growled, his claws scraping against the metal desk. Our supply chains are the most efficient in the galaxy. His aide, a nervous young Corvan named HFY, shifted uncomfortably. Sir, the analysis shows that most of our logistics coordination was handled through contracts with human companies. When they disappeared, the automated systems began failing. Zektar's eyes narrowed. Human companies? What human companies? HFY pulled up a holographic display showing dozens of corporate names. Terran Logistics Solutions, Human Resource Management Inc., Earth Supply Chain Consultants. They were all small firms that handled what seemed like minor coordination tasks. Minor tasks that apparently kept our entire military supplied, Zektar said bitterly. The same conversation was happening across the galaxy. On the Ashanti homeworld, Minister Vulthet watched his bureaucracy collapse in slow motion. Forms weren't being processed. Communications between departments had stopped. The great administrative machine that had run smoothly for centuries was grinding to a halt. The humans built our data management systems, his technical advisor explained. They also trained most of our IT staff and handled system maintenance. Without them, everything is breaking down. Vulthet had always prided himself on Ashanti efficiency. Their bureaucracy was famous throughout the galaxy for its precision and speed. Now he discovered that this efficiency had depended entirely on human-designed software and human technical support. How many humans worked in our administration? He asked. About 12% of our total workforce, came the reply. But they occupied key positions in every major department. The news from the outer systems grew worse each day. The elegant Syleth had discovered that their recent artistic golden age was ending abruptly. The special materials they used for their most beautiful sculptures came from human chemical companies. Without these materials, their art was reverting to primitive forms. Master artist Silandra stood in her studio, staring at a half-finished sculpture that would never be completed. The flowing, color-changing metal that made Syleth art so magnificent was a human invention. She had never bothered to learn how it was made. We assumed it was just another trade good, she whispered to her apprentice. We never realized they were the only ones who knew how to create it. But the most shocking discovery came from the Luminar Collective. These beings of pure energy had always considered themselves the most advanced species in the galaxy. They needed no food, no air, no physical comforts. They existed as consciousness inhabiting massive energy networks that spanned entire star systems. Yet even they were not immune to humanity's absence. Prime Luminar. Zephyr flickered with distress as he reviewed the reports. Our power grids are experiencing cascading failures across 17 systems. Critical overloads are occurring every few days. His subordinate, a younger energy being named Velos, pulsed with confusion. But our systems are perfectly designed. They've run without problems for thousands of years. That's what we thought, Zephyr replied. But it seems that humans have been preventing these overloads for the past 2 centuries. They worked as maintenance technicians on our platforms. The revelation was staggering. Humans had somehow understood Luminar energy systems better than the Luminar themselves. They had identified potential problems before they occurred and quietly fixed them. The Luminar had dismissed them as primitive flesh beings who couldn't possibly understand advanced energy mechanics. They had been wrong. Back on the council station, Kethvar continued his investigation into humanity's true role in galactic civilization. What he found disturbed him more each day. The humans hadn't just been participants in galactic society. They had been its hidden foundation. Every major trade route in the galaxy had human shipping companies handling critical links in the supply chain. Every species' most important technological advances in the past 2 centuries showed signs of human involvement. Even the Council's own legislative processes had depended on human legal experts who understood the complex web of interspecies law better than anyone else. It's like they were everywhere and nowhere at the same time, Kethvar explained to Sage Morthun during one of their private meetings. They took jobs that seemed unimportant, but when you look at the bigger picture, they were holding everything together. The ancient ethereal's form flickered thoughtfully. Perhaps that was intentional. What do you mean? The humans were always different from us, Morthun said. They didn't seek glory or recognition. They were content to work behind the scenes, solving problems that others didn't even notice. Kethvar had to agree. In all his years of working with Ambassador Chen, he had never heard her boast about human achievements. She fought hard for human rights, but she rarely mentioned what humans were actually contributing to galactic society. The investigation took a disturbing turn when Kethvar discovered that several species were facing serious problems without human support. The Christek, a silicon-based life form, were experiencing reproductive failures. Their birth rates had been declining for generations, but the problem had been masked by human biochemical supplements that no one had understood were necessary for Christek survival. Dr. Zendar, the Christek's chief medical officer, admitted the truth with obvious shame. We thought the human supplements were just health boosters, expensive but optional. We never realized our species was dependent on them. How long has this been going on? Kethvar asked. Nearly 300 years, Zendar replied. Our natural reproduction began failing after we started living on artificial worlds. The humans identified the problem and created a solution, but they never told us how serious it was. Without the supplements, the Christek faced extinction within a generation. Similar stories emerged from across the galaxy. The Void Runners, mysterious beings who lived in the empty spaces between stars, had been kept stable by human medical treatments. Without them, they were reverting to their original aggressive state, raiding ships and attacking settlements. The proud hegemon collective discovered that their planet-sized cities were suffering power failures because human engineers had been secretly maintaining their infrastructure. The Corvin Empire's automated defense systems were shutting down without human oversight. As reports flooded in, a terrible picture emerged. Humanity hadn't been a junior partner in galactic civilization. They had been its secret guardians, quietly preventing disasters and solving problems that other species either couldn't see or couldn't solve. And now they were gone. Kethvar stood on the observation deck of the council station, looking out at the stars. Somewhere in that vast darkness, humanity was alive and well. They had planned their departure carefully, taking only what was theirs and leaving the rest of the galaxy to stand on its own. The question that haunted him was simple. Could they? Trade routes were collapsing. Infrastructure was failing. Some species were literally dying out. The galactic civilization that had seemed so stable and advanced was revealing itself to be built on foundations that had walked away in the night. For the first time since humanity's departure, Kethvar began to wonder if the galaxy would survive without them. 1 year after humanity's departure, Chancellor Vexthal watched his empire burn from the comfort of his command throne. Not literally, of course, but the reports flooding in painted a picture just as devastating. The Void Runners had struck again, this time hitting a major supply convoy heading to the frontier worlds. 18 ships destroyed, thousands dead, and critical supplies lost. This is the 15th attack this month, his military advisor reported. They're getting bolder. Our defense protocols aren't stopping them. Vexthal's claws dug into the armrests of his throne. The Void Runners had always been a minor nuisance, occasionally raiding isolated ships near the galactic rim. They were dangerous but predictable, keeping to the empty spaces between stars where few ships traveled. For decades they had posed no real threat to major shipping lanes. Now they were everywhere. What changed? He demanded. Why are they suddenly attacking core systems? His advisor hesitated before answering. Sir, our analysis suggests that human security companies were preventing these attacks. They had contracts with most major shipping lines to provide route consultation services. Another human service that no one had understood. Vexthal was beginning to hate that phrase. The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. Human consultants hadn't just been planning efficient shipping routes. They had been tracking Void Runner movements, predicting their attack patterns, and quietly steering commercial traffic away from danger zones. The shipping companies had thought they were paying for fuel-efficient routes. They had actually been paying for protection from threats they didn't even know existed. Without human oversight, ships were flying blindly into Void Runner territory. The raiders were taking advantage of the chaos, striking targets that had been protected for decades. On the hegemon homeworld, Prime Governor Thexmore faced an even more immediate crisis. The massive city arcologies that housed billions of hegemon citizens were failing. Power grids designed to last for millennia were shutting down section by section. The cascade started in Sector 7, his chief engineer reported. A simple overload that should have been contained by the automatic systems. Instead, it spread to 6 adjacent sectors before we could stop it. How is that possible? Thexmore asked. Our systems are foolproof. They were foolproof because human engineers had been making small adjustments for centuries, came the bitter reply. Tiny modifications to prevent exactly this kind of cascade failure. We never noticed because the problems never reached critical levels. The hegemon had always prided themselves on their perfect cities. Every system was designed with multiple redundancies and fail-safes. What they hadn't realized was that even perfect systems needed constant small adjustments to handle the unexpected. Humans had been providing those adjustments, fixing problems before they became disasters. Now the disasters were coming fast. Sector 12 went dark the next day. Then Sector 4. Each failure made the remaining systems work harder, creating new stress points that led to more failures. The cascading collapse was accelerating. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on thousands of worlds. The Christek birth rate had dropped to 0. The Silith art community had collapsed as their special materials ran out. Even the energy-based Luminar were struggling, as their power networks experienced failures that their ancient knowledge couldn't explain or prevent. Kethvar reviewed the disaster reports from his office in the council station. Every day brought new evidence of humanity's hidden role in galactic civilization. They hadn't just been participants or even partners. They had been the invisible repair crew for an entire galaxy, fixing problems that other species either couldn't see or couldn't solve. We have to find them, he told Sage Morthun during their daily meeting. The galaxy is falling apart without them. The ancient ethereal's form pulsed with what might have been sadness. The Council has authorized search expeditions to 17 human systems. All have returned with the same report. Kethvar knew what came next, but he needed to hear it again. They found nothing. Worse than nothing, Morthun corrected. The human worlds are still there. The buildings are intact. The infrastructure remains functional, but there is no sign that humans ever lived there. It was the most disturbing aspect of humanity's departure. They hadn't just evacuated their populations. They had somehow erased all evidence of their presence. Personal belongings, family photos, cultural artifacts, even graves and cemeteries. Everything was gone. The worlds looked like they had been built by some other species and then abandoned. Captain Rextar of the Corvin Exploration Fleet had described it best after returning from the human colony of New Terra. It's like walking through a museum of alien architecture. Everything is there, but it feels empty in a way that goes beyond just no people living there. It feels like it never had people living there. The search teams had found the same thing on every human world they visited. Cities without history, homes without memories, entire civilizations that seemed to have been built and then forgotten by whoever made them. But the most chilling discovery came when the teams tried to access human computer systems. Every database was empty. Every hard drive was wiped. Every server contained nothing but basic operating systems with no user data, no logs, no record of what they had once contained. It was as if humanity had performed digital surgery on their own history, cutting themselves out of every record and leaving no trace of what they had known, or how they had known it. "How is it possible?" Kethvar asked. "You can't erase an entire civilization's worth of data without leaving some trace." "Perhaps," Morthon replied. "Their capabilities were greater than we realized." That was becoming the common theme of everything related to humanity. Every week brought new revelations about things humans had been capable of that no one in the Council had suspected. Their technology was more advanced than anyone had guessed. Their understanding of other species was deeper than anyone had imagined. Their integration into galactic systems was more complete than anyone had realized. The Council had treated them like primitive newcomers who were lucky to be allowed into galactic society. Now it seemed that humanity had been the most advanced species in the galaxy, quietly keeping everyone else alive while pretending to be grateful for the privilege. It was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. The situation grew more desperate by the day. The Void Runner attacks were spreading. Critical infrastructure was failing across dozens of systems. Some species were facing extinction. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for centuries were collapsing as the complex web of human support services disappeared. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council devolved into shouting matches as species blamed each other for problems they couldn't solve. The Corvin demanded military support to fight the Void Runners. The Hegemon needed technical assistance to prevent their cities from falling. The Christek begged for help developing reproductive supplements before their species died out. But there were no solutions to offer. The humans had taken their knowledge with them, leaving behind only the problems they had been solving in secret. Chancellor Vexthul finally did what the proud Corvin leader had never thought he would do. He officially requested that the Council authorize a massive search operation to find humanity and ask for their help. "We need them back," he admitted during the emergency session. "The galaxy cannot survive without them." For the first time in Council history, every species representative voted in favor of the same resolution. The search for humanity was authorized with unlimited resources and highest priority. But as the search fleets departed for the far reaches of the galaxy, Kethvar couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. Humanity had been planning their departure for years, maybe decades. They wouldn't have left without ensuring they couldn't be followed. Somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, humanity was watching the galaxy struggle with problems they had once solved effortlessly. The question that haunted Kethvar was whether they would choose to return and save a civilization that had never appreciated what they did, or whether they would let the galactic community learn the hard way what it meant to stand alone. 18 months after humanity's departure, Sage Morthon floated in the deepest meditation chambers of the Council Station, his ethereal form connected to data streams that spanned the galaxy. For weeks he had been reaching out with his consciousness, touching every database, every archive, every fragment of information that might reveal the truth about humanity's role in galactic civilization. What he found changed everything. The ancient ethereal emerged from his meditation with knowledge that would shake the very foundations of how every species understood their place in the galaxy. He called for an emergency council session, his usually calm voice carrying an urgency that commanded immediate attention. "Honored representatives," Morthon began as the assembled delegates gathered in the great chamber, "I have discovered the truth about humanity's departure. But to understand it, you must first understand what we have lost." Ambassador Kethvar leaned forward in his seat. For months he had been investigating humanity's hidden influence, but he sensed that Morthon's findings went far deeper than his own discoveries. "Humanity did not leave because they were angry with us," the sage continued. "They did not leave because they felt unwelcome or unappreciated. They left because they realized that their presence was preventing the galaxy from growing up." Chancellor Vexthul's claws scraped against his chair. "What do you mean, growing up?" Morthon's form pulsed with what might have been sadness. For the past 3 centuries, humanity has been the hidden foundation of our civilization. Not just participants, not just contributors, they have been the invisible adults managing a galaxy of children. The chamber erupted in angry protests, but Morthun's next words silenced them. Every species' greatest achievement in the last 200 years has human fingerprints on it. The Corvin's invincible military fleet? It runs on tactical algorithms developed by human strategists. The Ashanti's perfect bureaucracy? It operates on efficiency protocols designed by human systems analysts. The Sileth's cultural renaissance? It depends on materials and techniques invented by human scientists. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Even this council's decision-making processes have been subtly guided by human psychological insights. The translation protocols that allow us to communicate? Human-designed. The trade agreements that keep our economies stable? Negotiated using human diplomatic techniques. The peace we have enjoyed for generations? Maintained by human peacekeepers working behind the scenes to prevent conflicts before they started. Prime Governor Thexamore of the Hegemon stood up, his voice shaking with disbelief. That's impossible. Our civilization is thousands of years old. Humans have only been part of it for a few centuries. Yes, Morthun agreed. And in those few centuries they transformed everything. They didn't conquer us or rule us. They quietly made us better at being ourselves. The sage's form flickered as he accessed deeper data streams. The Corvin were fierce warriors, but their battles were chaotic and wasteful until humans taught them strategic thinking. The Ashanti were organized administrators, but their systems were rigid and inefficient until humans showed them how to adapt. Every species retained their core nature, but humans helped them express it more effectively. Kethvar felt pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place in his mind. That's why their involvement was so hard to track. They weren't replacing us. They were making us better versions of ourselves. Exactly, Morthun confirmed. And that is why their departure is so devastating. We didn't just lose their direct contributions. We lost the improved versions of ourselves that they had helped us become. The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. Species that had prided themselves on their ancient wisdom and advanced capabilities were learning that their recent success had depended on guidance from the youngest members of galactic society. But Morthun wasn't finished. The most disturbing truth is that several species are facing extinction without human intervention. The Christek's reproductive failures, the Void Runners' increasing aggression, the Cascade failures in Hegemon cities. These aren't new problems. They're old problems that humans had been quietly solving for centuries. Dr. Zendar, representing the Christek, spoke with obvious shame. Our species began experiencing reproductive difficulties over 3 centuries ago, shortly after we began colonizing artificial worlds. We never connected our declining birth rates to our new environment. Humans identified the problem and provided supplements, but they never told us how critical they were. Because telling you would have created dependency, Morthun explained. Humans were trying to help without creating permanent reliance. They hoped that eventually each species would develop their own solutions. The pattern was the same across the galaxy. Humans had been treating symptoms while hoping that the underlying problems would eventually be addressed by the species themselves. But that had never happened. Instead, everyone had become comfortable relying on human fixes while ignoring the root causes. Captain Rextar, recently returned from another failed search mission, provided the most chilling revelation of all. We've now searched 47 human colonies and found the same thing everywhere. They didn't just evacuate, they erased themselves. Every trace of their presence has been removed with surgical precision. How is that possible? Demanded Chancellor Vexthul. Their technology was far more advanced than we realized, Rextar replied. The empty human worlds aren't just abandoned. They've been restored to exactly the condition they were in before humans arrived. Every modification has been undone. Every human-built structure has been carefully dismantled and the original landscape restored. Morthun's form grew brighter. They had the capability to hide their true technological level for centuries. They could have dominated us easily, but instead they chose to work quietly in the background, fixing problems and preventing disasters while letting us take credit for our own progress. The implications were staggering. Humanity had possessed technology advanced enough to completely erase their presence from dozens of worlds, yet they had spent centuries working in menial jobs and support roles. They had allowed themselves to be treated as junior partners while secretly being the most capable species in the galaxy. Why? Kethvar asked the question that everyone was thinking. Why would they hide their abilities? Why work in the shadows instead of taking their rightful place as leaders? Morthan's answer came after a long pause. Because they understood something that we did not. True strength isn't about domination. It's about service. They chose to use their advanced capabilities to help others, rather than to rule others. And they left because we were never going to learn that lesson, while they were here to solve our problems for us. Kethavar realized, yes, the sage confirmed, humanity's departure was not abandonment. It was graduation. They removed themselves to force us to either develop true independence or face the consequences of our own limitations. The chamber fell silent as the full weight of the truth settled on the assembled delegates. They had spent months blaming humanity for leaving them in crisis, but the real crisis was their own inability to handle problems without human help. Chancellor Vexthul was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. They sacrificed their place in galactic society to give us a chance to grow up. And now, Morthun said sadly, we must prove whether we deserve that sacrifice. The session ended with no resolutions passed and no decisions made. What could they decide? How do you replace an entire species that had been secretly holding your civilization together? As the delegates filed out, Kethavar remained behind, staring at the empty seat where Ambassador Chen used to sit. For the first time, he understood her tired expression during their last conversation. She had known this day was coming. She had spent her career fighting for human rights while knowing that her people were already carrying the galaxy on their shoulders. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, humanity was waiting to see what the galaxy would make of itself without them. The question that haunted everyone was whether galactic civilization would rise to meet their example or crumble under the weight of its own inadequacy. The answer would determine not just the fate of individual species, but the future of consciousness itself in their corner of the universe. 2 years after humanity's departure, Ambassador Kethavar sat alone in what remained of the Galactic Council chambers. Half the seats were empty now. The Christech representative had died 3 months ago, the last of his species. The Hegemon delegation had stopped coming after their homeworld's power grid collapsed completely. The Void Runners had descended into complete madness, their attacks now so random and violent that no ship dared travel the outer rim. The great chamber that once hosted debates between dozens of species now echoed with the voices of only 7 delegates. Even the council station itself was dying, its systems failing one by one as the complex web of human-designed maintenance protocols slowly broke down. Kethavar held a small data crystal in his forehands, turning it over and over as he had done every day for the past month. It was the only human artifact left behind after their departure. Found hidden in a maintenance shaft deep in the station's core, its discovery had been pure accident, a repair crew trying to fix yet another system. Failure had stumbled across it tucked away where no one would think to look. The crystal contained technical specifications for basic life support systems, power generation and environmental controls. Nothing advanced or revolutionary, just the fundamental blueprints for keeping people alive in space. But attached to the specifications was a simple message that had haunted Kethavar since he first read it. When you're ready to build something better than what came before, you'll know how to find us, that was all. No coordinates, no contact information, no detailed instructions. Just a promise that somehow, when the galaxy had learned what it needed to learn, humanity would be waiting. Kethavar wasn't sure the galaxy would survive long enough to learn anything. The collapse had accelerated beyond anyone's worst predictions. The Corvan Empire had fractured into warring factions as their supply lines failed completely. The Ashanti bureaucracy had devolved into chaos as their data systems crashed, and no one knew how to repair them. Beautiful Silith colonies had become ghost worlds as their art-based economy disappeared overnight. Some species had tried to adapt. The Luminar had thrown their vast collective intelligence into understanding their own power systems, making some progress in preventing the cascade failures that had plagued them. A few Corvan military leaders had begun developing new tactical approaches that didn't rely on human algorithms. The youngest generation of Ashanti were attempting to create simpler, more flexible administrative systems. But for every small success, there were a dozen failures. Too much knowledge had been lost. Too many critical systems depended on human understanding that no one else possessed. The galaxy was trying to learn in 2 years what humanity had spent centuries mastering. It's not working, Chancellor Vexthul had admitted during the last council session 3 weeks ago. His mighty empire was crumbling around him. and even his warrior pride couldn't hide the desperation in his voice. We're not smart enough. We're not fast enough. We're not human enough. That had been the moment when Kethavar finally understood what humanity had been trying to teach them. It wasn't about technology or knowledge or advanced capabilities. It was about something much more fundamental. Humans had succeeded not because they were the most intelligent species or the most powerful, but because they approached problems differently than everyone else. Other species had evolved to excel in specific areas. The Corvin were natural warriors. The Ashanti were born administrators. The Silith were gifted artists. Each had developed their particular talents to incredible heights, but they had also become trapped by their own specializations. Humans were generalists. They could fight when necessary, but they preferred to find peaceful solutions. They could administrate when required, but they looked for ways to make systems more flexible. They appreciated art, but they also understood engineering. They could do everything reasonably well, which meant they could see connections and solutions that specialists missed. More importantly, they seemed to genuinely care about other species' well-being. Not just as allies or trading partners, but as fellow conscious beings worthy of help and respect. They had spent centuries quietly solving other species' problems not for profit or power, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. That was the lesson the galaxy was failing to learn. They were still thinking like separate species competing for advantage. They needed to start thinking like a community, working together toward common goals. Kethavar looked around the empty chamber and wondered if there was still time. The few remaining delegates had been meeting informally to discuss possible solutions. Prime Luminar Zephyra had suggested that the energy beings could share their knowledge more freely with other species. Master artist Silandra proposed that the Silith could focus their aesthetic sense on designing more beautiful and intuitive interfaces for critical systems. Even General Zektar had grudgingly admitted that Corvin military discipline could be applied to civilian infrastructure projects. Small steps, but they were in the right direction. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Dr. Veltar, a young Ashanti researcher, had been studying the human data crystal's technical specifications when she noticed something interesting. The designs weren't just functional, they were elegant. Every system was built to work with other systems. Every component was designed to be easily understood and maintained by non-specialists. Humans didn't just solve problems, she had explained to the others. They solved them in ways that would be easy for other species to understand and modify. Look at these power generation systems. A Luminar could improve the energy efficiency. A Hegemon could scale up the size. A Corvin could make them more robust for military use. They're like building blocks that anyone can work with. That insight had led to the most important realization of all. Humanity hadn't just been maintaining galactic civilization, they had been trying to teach it. Every system they designed, every problem they solved, every service they provided had been crafted to be comprehensible and adaptable by other species. They had been leaving lessons everywhere, disguised as routine maintenance and standard procedures. The galaxy had been too proud to recognize that they were being educated. Kethavar stood up and walked to the great window that looked out over the stars. Somewhere in that vast darkness, humanity was waiting, not as conquerors or saviors, but as teachers hoping their students would eventually figure out the curriculum. The question was whether any students would survive long enough to graduate. As if summoned by his thoughts, the chamber doors opened and Sage Morthan entered, his ethereal form brighter than usual. The Council Station's life support systems have been restored, he announced. The young researchers working with Dr. Veltar managed to implement the human design successfully. It was the first major system repair in months. A small victory, but a real one. There's more, Morthun continued. 7 species have agreed to participate in Dr. Veltar's knowledge-sharing project. They're calling it the Cooperative Infrastructure Initiative. Kethavar felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Representatives from the surviving colonies have also voted to establish permanent research exchanges, the sage added. Corvin engineers working with Luminar energy specialists, Ashanti system designers collaborating with Silith interface artists. It's the first truly cooperative effort since humanity's departure. Maybe the galaxy was finally learning the lesson. Maybe there was still time. Kethavar held up the data crystal, watching starlight refract through its surfaces. Do you think they know? Do you think humanity is watching what we're doing? Morthan's form flickered with what might have been a smile. I think they're hoping we'll surprise them. Outside the window, the stars seemed a little brighter than they had in months. Somewhere among them, humanity was waiting for the galaxy to prove it had learned what it meant to work together, to build something better than what came before. The galaxy stood on the edge between evolution and extinction, between maturity and collapse, between accepting hard truths and clinging to comfortable lies. For the first time in centuries, the choice was entirely their own, and for the first time since humanity left, Kethvar believed they might choose wisely.